I told you. I told you.
Yo, good money. Good money. I can get this all up. You ready?
When preacher Lil Kenny walked out of federal prison after 4.5 years, the first name Memphis started talking about wasn't his own. It was Moneybagg Yo's. That alone should tell you something happened. Did Kenny come home with unfinished business? Did he come home having discovered that people he trusted, people from his own world, had flipped to Moneybagg's side while he was locked away and couldn't do anything about it? Because what started circulating the moment Kenny resurfaced wasn't talk about music. It was the kind of conversation that implies a man with Grammy nominations and #1 albums, one of the most powerful figures in Southern rap, suddenly found himself in the crosshairs of somebody who came home furious. So let's ask it directly. Did preacher Lil Kenny just extort Moneybagg Yo? And what gave him the position to do it? To understand that, you have to understand who Lil Kenny actually is. He's a co-founder of Young Mob, one of South Memphis's most deeply rooted street crews. Not a rap affiliation, a founding position inside an organization, with real community history and real stakes attached to it. His credibility was never built on streaming numbers or chart performance. It's structural, rooted in who he is inside that community. That foundation is exactly what made his alignment with young Dolph's world feel completely organic to everyone watching from inside Memphis. Dolph, before his murder in November 2021, represented that same South Memphis philosophy on a much bigger stage. Paper route empire built on radical independence, turning down major labels, refusing to let the industry define him. Lil Kenny's connection to that world was ideological, not just professional, and the streets understood it completely. Here's where it gets complicated, though. Before the lines fully hardened, Kenny and Moneybagg Yo actually shared enough common ground to make music together. In 2018, they collaborated on a track called Uh-Oh. At that point, Moneybagg was building real momentum off projects like Federal 3X and Too Heartless, while Kenny was a deeply respected figure in the South Memphis underground. Their collaboration tells you something about that specific moment. The boundaries between what would later become hardened, opposing camps weren't locked in yet. Artists could still move across circles without every association reading as a political statement. That common ground didn't survive what came next. Moneybagg fully committed to Yo Gotti's CMG, becoming not just a signee, but the label's flagship artist. CMG was one of the most institutionally powerful operations to come out of the South, and full commitment to it transformed Moneybagg's career from regional success into national phenomenon. In 2020, Time Served debuted at #1 on the Billboard 200, his first #1. In 2021, A Gangster's Pain did it again. Back-to-back #1s, a Grammy nomination, mainstream features. He became the most visible face of Gotti's empire. And that specific status, CMG's flagship star, is exactly what made an old friendship structurally impossible to maintain. Because you can't separate CMG's rise from the war that defined what it meant to be on the other side of that divide. The conflict between Yo Gotti and Young Dolph was one of the most serious rivalries in Memphis rap history. Not casual subliminals, but pointed direct confrontations, multiple attempts on Dolph's life, including being shot multiple times outside a Los Angeles concert in 2017, and surviving. This wasn't industry competition. This was something people on both sides lived with daily, and it shaped who artists could be seen with and what they were willing to put on record. There was no neutral ground. You were CMG world or you were PRE world. Lil Kenny's position was never ambiguous to anyone who knew South Memphis. So when Moneybagg became Gotti's biggest star, the friendship that produced Uh-Oh didn't just become awkward. It became impossible to sustain within the actual realities of Memphis rap politics. Now here's what Lil Kenny actually came home to, and why his return generated the specific energy it did. When Kenny went into federal custody, he left behind a network of relationships he had every reason to expect would hold in his absence. People who were supposed to maintain certain loyalties while he couldn't protect his own interests. 4.5 years is a long time. Long enough for financial pressure to mount, long enough for CMG's commercial gravity to pull people who might have been wavering. What Kenny reportedly found when he came home was that mutual street allies, people who existed in shared space between his world and Moneybagg's world, had flipped toward CMG. In the culture both men were raised in, an allegiance shift while someone is incarcerated and unable to defend their own interests isn't something that gets quietly processed and moved past. It's treated as a fundamental violation of a code South Memphis considers non-negotiable, the kind of thing that demands a direct response, immediately, in a way that makes the consequences of moving wrong clear to everyone watching. That fury is what transformed the existing CMG versus PRE tension into something pointed directly at Moneybagg specifically. Because as CMG's most visible representative, he became the natural focal point for everything Kenny came home carrying. This wasn't abstract camp rivalry anymore. It was personal, about specific people making specific choices, and about the man who represented the world those people chose when they were supposed to hold something down for someone who couldn't hold it down himself. The music Kenny released after his release reflected exactly that energy, and Memphis heard it the way the city always hears that kind of record. Memphis rap has always communicated through subliminal disses, precise enough for the intended audience to decode completely, while staying ambiguous enough on the surface that no name has to be said outright. When Kenny's post-release music carried language Memphis recognized as pointed toward the CMG world, the city didn't read it as general aggression. It read it as specific communication from someone with a specific grievance and a specific intention to make sure the people responsible understood there would be consequences. The streets knew. The people in the middle who'd made choices during his absence knew. And Moneybagg, sitting at the top of the commercial world while all of this circulated through South Memphis, knew too. That's the real kicker of this whole situation. What it reveals about the limits of commercial success as insulation from street accountability. By the time Kenny came home, Moneybagg was operating at a level that should theoretically have placed him beyond that kind of pressure. 2 #1 albums, Grammy nominations, business ventures stretching beyond music, institutional backing from one of the South's most powerful labels. By every industry metric, he was untouchable. And yet the conversation that emerged from Kenny's return suggested none of that commercial armor actually protected him from the streets he originally came from. Memphis doesn't read Billboard charts. It keeps its own records, in its own language, on its own timeline. And when those records show someone benefited from a situation that left other people holding consequences they shouldn't have carried alone, commercial elevation doesn't cancel that accounting. It still gets applied. For anyone who doesn't fully understand what extortion means in this context, it's worth being clear. This isn't necessarily a formal transaction with explicit demands written down anywhere. Pressure in this world takes many forms. A direct conversation between people who understand each other completely, music that communicates leverage clearly enough that the target knows exactly what he's looking at, or simply a public reemergence that signals to the entire city that someone has come home with information, with history, and with the standing to use both. It doesn't need a formal announcement. It needs to land with the right people in the right rooms. And everything about Kenny's return suggests it landed exactly where it was intended to. At the end of the day, this comes down to what Memphis has always come down to: loyalty. And what happens when it breaks? Kenny went away. People moved. Allies flipped toward CMG's commercial power. The world reorganized itself around his absence in ways that violated a code he expected to be honored. And when he came home, he didn't accept that new arrangement quietly. He came back with the energy of someone who'd spent 4.5 years thinking about exactly this, with the standing in South Memphis that nobody in his world could question. The real question now is what happens next. What does Moneybagg do with the position this has placed him in? What does Kenny do with the momentum his return has generated in a city that's clearly paying attention? Memphis doesn't resolve these things cleanly or quickly. It sits in the tension. It always has. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Did Kenny have the position to apply this kind of pressure? And does the history between these two camps make this feel inevitable? Subscribe for more Memphis stories that go exactly this deep.